What a wild week, right? What, with no school on Monday and the PSAT test on Wednesday. It was kind of a weird week. But we did get one thing done last week. And that was we kind of got started on the Korean War. What did we do last week? Well, we really did only two things as far as the war is concerned. The first thing is we exposed ourselves to the concept that not everybody sees the Korean War the same way. We looked at two excerpts of textbooks that talked about the start of the Korean War. One from a North Korean textbook and one from a South Korean textbook. We looked at how they presented the start of the war differently, but in a lot of ways they agreed on a lot of things. Both textbooks agreed the attack was a surprise, both agreed on the date that the war started, and both agreed that the Americans were involved. But after that, the differences were quite stark. History is a funny thing. It's not black and white. It's not like math. It's not like physics where you have formulas that describe something as being, one way or the other. It's not like a math problem where you have one answer and the way that you mess it up is somewhere in the calculations. History is very much a soft, squishy science that can change based on who's doing the writing and what the goal of the writing is. So the moral of that particular story is we've always got to be suspicious of textbooks and history books because history writers are human and they're bound to have biases and they're bound to have agendas. Look to what happened in Colorado recently with students who were protesting the school board's decision to reject the AP US history curriculum and attempt to adopt one that's very different from what the AP board felt was important for students to know and how the students responded to it. History is very emotionally charged, especially when we're talking about things in history that challenge our beliefs in our country and morals and values and our historical heritage. So, and this isn't going to be the first time that we run into this either. We're going to look at several events throughout modern U.S. history, and we're going to see how it literally changes from person to person as we see these important events unfold. What is important is that we know that the war started and we knew that we were involved. So at the end of the week, when I know a weird week, right? I'm gone to a tournament. So at the end of the week, I had you guys just read out of our own textbook, which we may find out as the year progresses is quite flawed in its own right. Hopefully you've got a basic idea of the workings of the war. There are a few things that I want to stress as we go into the following week's work. And number one is the concept of Korea as a war that very few people were paying attention to, very few people understood, and at the end people were able to quickly forget. It was a war that wasn't like World War II. And that's what a lot of people thought war should have been like, and it didn't play out that way, and it caught Americans off guard a little bit, and it also basically didn't hold on to them the way that World War II held on to everyone's attention. One of those iconic numbers, which we'll be stuck with for the course of the week, of course, is the 38th parallel. And the idea of dividing a country between capitalist and communist forces. We saw that in Germany, and now we're seeing it again in Korea. And of course, later on down the road, we're going to see that happening in Vietnam as well. Korea and Berlin and Vietnam are all examples of what we call proxy wars. And a proxy war is where two smaller combatants who represent larger combatants duke it out. So in a way, the United States is fighting against, in this case, communist China, but we're not actually fighting in a war officially declared against China. We have South Korean allies, and they have North Korean allies, and Americans are involved, and Chinese are involved, but it's not officially a war between the two big powers, but it is a war between the two competing sides of the Cold War, this whole capitalism versus communism thing. So we're going to see lots of examples of proxy wars as we make our way through the 50s and obviously the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s. So the next thing that we will look at this week, of course, is the question of who runs the military. There is an incredibly engaging debate between the military commander on the ground and the civilian leader the president, who by constitutional law is the top commander, is the commander-in-chief. The founding fathers said that a civilian elected by the people should be the person responsible at the end of the day for the major decisions of the military. And what Korea does is it puts a president who doesn't agree with his commander on the ground. It raises the question, to what extent does the president control the day-to-day operations? To what extent does the president control strategy? And we're going to see how MacArthur and how Truman differed in how they felt that they should handle Korea, and how ultimately that will cost MacArthur his job. And then the outrage that pours out about it, and the political debate. What does commander-in-chief actually mean, and what kind of precedent will this set into the future? We're looking at a war that has as much political decision-making in its operations as it does military, and that trend is going to continue moving into the future. The president will have more and more of a direct say on day-to-day operations, especially as we move on into Vietnam. So the third thing that I think is worth looking at is the concept of the Korean War as the forgotten war. It didn't play out like World War II. Americans didn't necessarily know what to do with it. It was in a part of the world that Americans didn't seem to care about all that much. And the soldiers didn't get the kind of party coming home the way that the World War II veterans did. It's probably our duty as American citizens just to learn about and appreciate the Korean War, and to learn about and appreciate the sacrifices that Americans made fighting in that war. Regardless of whether or not Americans bought into the Korean War as something they should care about or remember, today, we should look back and say Americans went to a foreign land, they died in a foreign land, blood was spilled and treasure was spent in an engagement that the military and the political leadership felt was a fight worth fighting. So in a way, it's our duty as American citizens to look back and to not only study those events, but also to empathize, to comprehend, to appreciate the actions and sacrifices that our grandfathers, great uncles made in that very small part of the world. So the week in review video really isn't a week in review. It's more like a moving forward and taking a look at what we're looking at this week video, because we didn't have a lot for last week. So as far as this week is concerned, we've got our 3 things lined out. We're going to have some primary documents. We're going to have some war footage to take a look at. And then we'll be able to fit this into our larger understanding of the initial stages of Cold War foreign policy and how Truman implemented his concept of containment on communist expansion. And hopefully by the end of the week you'll be able to talk about how the Korean War fit into containment, as well as all the other things that we'll take a look at. But the big one is, again, how does the Korean War shape up as a particular part of the front in the Cold War between capitalism, communism, United States, Soviet Union, and Communist China? So we'll see you this up and coming week in class. It'll be a regular week with no weirdness, I hope, and I should be there the whole week. We'll see you all Monday. Insert catchy sign-off phrase here. Bye.
You're just a low life. Well, I'm glad